minutes going over some of the background and history and leading up to the planning board recommendation from their July meeting. So the first slide just shows some of the history. Again, discussion started in 2014 regarding applying different types of land use regulations, or at least zoning regulations, to the unzoned areas of the county. We currently implement a number of regulations in the unzoned areas of the county as well as zoned areas. So we have zoning, watershed regulations, flood damage prevention, junkyard ordinance, lighting provisions, mobile home park standards, and those all apply throughout the county. So we have regulations in the unzoned areas of the county now that apply to certain types of activities. The one missing item is the zoning regulations. So in 2014, discussion started with the Board of Commissioners. They requested that the Planning Board evaluate different options for regulating high-impact industries in unzoned areas of the county. So the Planning Board had a subcommittee that evaluated these options, and then ultimately provided 4 recommendations to the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners revisited the different options that were available, and 2015 requested that the Planning Board revisit this topic, reevaluate what options were available, and come back with recommendations. So the Planning Board again formed a subcommittee that met in the summer of last year. They came up with 5 recommendations that were ultimately provided to the Board of Commissioners. And then in November and December of last year, you as the board discussed these items, leading to the conclusion that you wanted to extend R1 and R5 zoning to the currently unzoned areas of the county. This led up to the June 6th public hearing, and then on July 12th, the Planning Board reviewed this matter and made a recommendation. And there are actually 4 recommendations that I'll be covering at the end of this presentation. This is a map of the area that's under consideration for zoning. So just to cover this and highlight it again, I know it's hard to see on the screen. The areas that are in this tan color are all proposed for R1 zoning. And this is the Corps of Engineers property. The areas that are in the darker brown, those are proposed for R5 zoning. And the rationale leading up to the R1 and R5 designation is these areas match the watershed designations that are currently in place in the county. So the county has a watershed protection ordinance that was adopted in 1993, became effective in 1994, and there's a map that accompanies that has different districts for watershed regulations. So the R5 areas match what are called river corridor watershed districts, where we already regulate at 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres. The only exception, and you may recall from the June meeting, there are some areas along the Deep River that are under this river corridor special area. So there was a discussion about whether or not to have that zone R5 or R1, and the board decided to move forward with the R5 because that matches the existing zoning along the majority of the Deep River. The R1 proposed areas match, it's kind of a mix of different watershed designations. The majority of those areas are in what are called local watershed districts. The Corps of Engineers property is actually in what's called WS4, Critical Area Watershed District, but it does allow, theoretically, 1 dwelling unit per acre development densities. So the areas that are under consideration for zoning tonight cover a little over 11,800 parcels, covers approximately 388 square miles. So as part of our notification process, there were public hearing signs posted within this notification area. There were about 1,000 signs that were put out over the course of 3 to 4 days, starting on May 16th. We then mailed letters to all the property owners on May 20th. We also developed a website that was dedicated specifically to this topic that included an FAQ sheet as well as maps, and then we've added some additional information like the PowerPoint that was provided at the June 6th meeting. We've already touched on the zoning includes the Corps of Engineers property, so this area on the map covers about 60 square miles in the county. All of that is not underwater, but the primary purpose, and one of the primary purposes of Jordan Lake is to serve as flood control, so there's a lot of additional land available in the event that there's a flooding event and water needs to be held back behind the dam. We did work with the Corps of Engineers, so early in the process we did notify them directly to make them aware that this was occurring, so we had correspondence back and forth with them. We did receive a letter from the Corps of Engineers, as we mentioned earlier. It was included in the application materials online, and included in that, I'll read a portion of this. The Corps Engineers letter, it included, in part, said the intent of the this letter is to communicate that the county zoning of this federal property will not change how the lands and waters are managed by the USACE. Local zoning ordinances are typically not applicable on federal property, as they may conflict or interfere with the federal purpose for which the property was acquired and operated. The waters of Jordan Lake and the surrounding federal lands are managed for congressionally authorized purposes, including public drinking water supply, fish and wildlife conservation, natural resource-based public recreation, water quality, and flood storage. The residential zoning of R1 over land around Jordan Lake is not compatible with the allocations and designations in the Jordan Lake Master Plan. Now, that being said, one of the things we had previously corresponded with the Corps about is that we know that the application of zoning on Corps property would not result in any action being taken by the county because it is federal property and it is exempt from local zoning. In talking with the Corps staff, the other property that's associated with Jordan Lake is under Corps ownership in Durham as well as in Wade counties is currently zoned as well. It's just different zoning designations, but again, zoning is applied to those jurisdictions, but from a regulatory standpoint, there's nothing that can be done by the local jurisdictions for an enforcement mechanism. We've already touched on R5 zoning being proposed along the major rivers, and then R1, again largely following the watershed regulations that are already in place. And we've already mentioned that there are a number of other regulations that are currently in place that regulate development activities in the county. This covers what does R1 and R5 mean. So in the zoning ordinance, we have a number of zoning designations, pretty much broken into three categories: residential, business, and industrial. Then there are three subcategories for residential. We have R1, R2, and R5. The R1 zoning represents approximately one dwelling unit per acre, so 40,000 square feet is just a little short of an acre. R2 is one dwelling unit per 90,000 square feet, which is approximately 2 acres. And then R5 is one dwelling unit per 5 acres with on average, with no lot being smaller than 3 acres in size. And again, all three of those zoning designations actually mirror watershed designations that are in place. As far as the use table, so we have a use table in the zoning ordinance that lists a number of uses that are allowed in the county, and it's broken down into these different categories of residential, business, and industrial. And in that chart, it designates what uses are allowed in these different districts. So the residential districts primarily allow for single-family residential development. There are a small number of non-residential uses that are allowed that are generally compatible with single-family residential. So schools, fire departments, those things are allowed by right within the residential zoning district. So there's no special zoning approval. If the school system purchases property and wants to build a school, it's all administrative review and approval. And the same would be for a fire department. For a lot of these uses, there are some additional stipulations in the zoning ordinance. So for a fire department in a residential district, they have to acquire at least 3 acres of property, and then the setbacks are increased on that property. But again, it's handled administratively as far as the review. Businesses are not allowed as a primary use and are subject to a rezoning process, so similar to what occurred prior to the public input session, where we had the rezoning case and then the conditional use permit revision. Those are the processes that would have to be followed if someone wants to open a business in an area that's zoned for residential purposes. Some additional items. In unzoned areas of the county, we don't have building setbacks from property lines unless it's a mobile home or a mobile home park. But for other structures on residential property, if it is zoned, you have to be 40 feet from your front property line and then 25 feet from all sides of your property line. So that is one of the bigger changes from a residential standpoint that people will have to accommodate. Existing structures that don't meet the setbacks are fine. They're allowed to continue. Nothing happens. But new structures that are added to the property would have to meet those setback requirements. Early on in the process, we did receive a number of inquiries about different issues. So one was private cemeteries. We don't regulate the private use of the property for a cemetery, but we would regulate a commercial cemetery. Manufactured mobile homes are not treated differently than stick-built or modular. So if you own a piece of property and want to place a mobile home on it, it goes through the normal permitting process. If it's actually stick-built, you just have to meet the setbacks and then obtain all your other regulatory permits. Bona fide farm uses are exempt from regulation, so I'll cover that a little bit more in another slide. as well as the existing businesses being grandfathered. And then again, new businesses require a rezoning. We also have provisions in the zoning ordinance for home occupations, and I'll cover that more in depth. So for the businesses in the unzoned areas of the county, if zoning is adopted, then those businesses will become non-conforming uses or grandfathered, and there are provisions in the zoning ordinance that dictate how we would handle those administratively. So there's no effect on continued operations. The use can be extended to additional buildings on the property or to cover additional area on the property as long as other existing requirements are met. So we have built upon regulations that currently apply even now throughout the county, all building permit requirements, those kind of things would still have to be met. Expansions to existing buildings are also allowed. So if you have an existing building that does not technically meet our setback requirements, the zoning ordinance is very generous in allowing for the expansion of the building in line with the existing building footprint. So if it's too close to a property line, we would still allow for that expansion to make that work for the business owner. As part of the notification process, we did include a business listing form with that letter. So in the letter, it had a section that dealt with that addressed businesses. And we did request that business owners return the notification to staff. So we received well over 1,000 of those notifications. A large majority, overwhelming majority, are actually farm uses. So those are activities that would not need to be rezoned to a different use and not grandfathered because they're technically exempt from regulation. So even if R1 or R5 zoning is applied to the property where a farm is operating, there are no additional standards that are triggered by the zoning being implemented on that property. Some additional items to point out: non-conforming uses cannot be extended to additional parcels. So there is a limit on how far a business can expand if the intent is to acquire additional property. So if a business owner acquires an adjacent piece of property for expansion, that would be subject to a rezoning. And then a non-conforming use cannot be changed to another non-conforming use. So if you have a property that has a gas station, you want to change it to, say, a restaurant, then that type of activity would require rezoning. So that use, the use itself that's existing is grandfathered, but you can't change it to something else. And then if a non-conforming use is discontinued for over a year, the property can only be used for a conforming use or a rezoning is required. And then again, as new businesses are subject to the rezoning process, that includes the public hearing, planning board review, and then it's back to the board of commissioners for approval or denial. Farm and agricultural uses, as mentioned previously, bona fide farm uses are exempt from zoning. Examples include this list: chicken houses, cattle operations, crop production, timber management. I spoke with someone who's starting, I think it was a catfish farm. It's aquaculture. That's going to be covered as one of these bona fide farm exemptions. It also applies to the structures and buildings that are used for the farm purpose. So that exemption extends to not only the activities such as timber management that may not involve a structure, but if you have chicken houses, the houses themselves will be exempt from zoning regulation. And again, this note, business listing forms did not need to be submitted for farm and agricultural uses, but we're still going to keep those on file. Now, one thing that we did discuss with a number of folks, the business listing forms do need to be submitted for the non-farm related business. So if you have a farm operating on your property and you've got a side business, we do need to know about that so we can appropriately grandfather the non-farm related business that's occurring on the property. So for home occupations, there are two different types of home occupations that are included in the zoning ordinance. These are administrative approvals, so these do not have to go through a public hearing process. They're not reviewed by the planning board, and they're not reviewed by the board of commissioners. So neighborhood home occupations allow up to 3 non-resident employees, for a total of 4 resident and non-resident employees who can work on the property. And again, it does not limit the number of employees who work off-site. You're not allowed to have outdoor display of goods or items, and you can operate the accessory or the home occupation in an accessory building up to 1,000 square feet that will be detached from your primary dwelling. And then rural home occupations, they're allowed on parcels that are 3 acres or larger in size. Still have the same stipulation or limit on the number of resident and non-resident employees who are working on site. So the reason this comes into play is we'll sometimes have, say, a landscaping business that will open up as a home occupation. For those employees who come to the site in the morning, get a work vehicle and then leave the site, those don't count as employees who are working on the site. So you may have 8 employees, but if only 1 or 2 are working in the office during the day, we don't count those other employees against the total number of employees. For rural home occupations, you can also have a larger accessory building that can be used for the home occupation. And then we've got stipulations on storage and then setbacks for the home occupation portion of the property. So moving forward to the planning board recommendations, I've got those pulled up. But before I cover those recommendations, I do want to cover some of the comments from the planning board meeting. So there was a kind of a wide-ranging discussion, and I'll just read through some of the comments. The zoning initiative should wait until the comprehensive plan is complete, that this item has been discussed for a year and a half, and most people don't want the county to change but disagree on how to achieve it. Core land doesn't need to be involved. The county has one of the highest population growths in the state. The planning board made a recommendation to zone west of Highway 87 and don't need to apply to 388 square miles. R1 and R5 zoning doesn't make sense. Conditional zoning requires a community meeting, and this initiative didn't have any. We prefer more information before implementing zoning. Zoning doesn't push people off their land, create development, or stop farms. Zoning is not a threat to farms, but your neighbor selling your property is a threat. It doesn't fully protect the county by preserving rural character. Chatham Park is coming, and zoning is a stopgap measure. And the county has been working on this for 18 months. That included 6 subcommittee meetings that were open to the public. So again, that's just a sampling of the comments by the planning board during the meeting. They had a much lengthier discussion when they were evaluating this. But it did lead to the 4 recommendations that are on the screen. So the first recommendation is adoption of zoning from the June 6, 2016 public hearing. So that matches what's on the 2 maps that are displayed here. And the motion was approved by a vote of 7-4. The second motion was to look at existing businesses and consider for the appropriate zoning, allow for rezoning with no fee, and follow the same process from 2009. And that motion was approved by a vote of 11-0. The third recommendation was regarding the Corps of Engineers property, and the recommendation was to change the R1 zoning to R5, and that motion was approved by a vote of 11-0. And that is an action that you could take tonight if you're inclined to move forward with zoning. If you want to switch the R1 zoning to R5 at any location, it is an option that's available. One thing I do want to point out in regards to recommendation number 3, and I was actually speaking with a resident Friday about this, and she was pointing out, she had attended the meeting, that there was additional discussion before the vote was taken on this, and the planning board did want to encourage the commissioners to consider a different type of zoning in the future for the Corps of Engineers property. So that was something I wanted to convey to you, is that was part of the discussion. It didn't make it into the motion, but that sentiment was expressed by the planning board. And then the final recommendation is adoption of the following consistency statement. And what was recommended is that the land conservation and development plan includes the following recommendations. Summary of major recommendations. Number 2, extend land use regulations to the entire county in order to guide development to appropriate locations, provide more certainty for landowners, and establish a basis for farmland preservation strategies. And number 3, to retain the current 5-acre average lot size in the areas designated in the county's watershed protection ordinance and shown as resource protection areas on the community plan map. And that motion was approved by a vote of 8-2. And you'll notice there were only 10 members present at that point, so that's the difference between the 11 members for the prior 3 items and the vote of 8-2 for the last item. So the land conservation and development plans are currently adopted comprehensive plan for the county. So that's taken from, language is taken directly from that document. So the planning board also, the planning board members who prepared a minority report, so Brian Bach is here to present that. There's also a majority report from the planning board, and George Lucia is here to present that. So if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy